And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome aboard, Charles Moscowitz. Normally Monday through Friday, 12 noon, but this being internet, I could do it anytime I want. That's one of the beauties of this. I no longer have to show up at a radio station, not that I wish I didn't, but in the old days when you were doing a radio show, if you weren't on time and you missed the train, you were in big trouble. But of course, in this day and age with internet, we can do the program anytime we want, really. And we can live stream. It's an amazing thing. It's a wonderful thing. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. And I'm working to build the program, of course. Dooovid is here. Doovid's a fellow YouTuber. Dooovid, thanks for joining me, as always.
Yeah, great. I was just mentioning Monday night already is the Hebrew New Year, it's Rosh Hashanah. Like a lot of domestic issues. The Texas abortion ban looks like it's going to hold through. The disastrous weather of New York, just looks like a disaster. Probably maybe even trillions of dollars in damage, and who knows how quickly they're going to be able to recover from that. And the Afghanistan, who knows what's going on there.
Horrible. And the other story, of course, that's supposed to happen actually on Rosh Hashanah. And we have to be very narrow in what we can talk about on this. So I'm going to stick to just the fact it's in the news. So you YouTuber censors, the Arizona forensic audit is due to issue the report on Tuesday, Rosh Hashanah, which I think has a great prescience to it. And apparently, from what I've been told, according to Boris Epstein, who's a very good reporter and who's on the site, there's going to be some very, very bombastic and convincing information in that report. I'll just leave it at that. Dooovid, I want to talk a little bit also about today's headline on the Drudge Report. And this, again, is the subject that we have to walk carefully because of the YouTube censors for some reason. And I'd ask those censors exactly what the deal is with this, why they're censoring this story. Joe Rogan, one of America's preeminent podcasters, Spotify, big podcaster, he had the COVID-19 virus. He said he was sick for 3 days, and now he's better because he took the eye drug. I'm not going to mention the name of it. And in combination with the Z-Pack. Now, this is named explicitly on Drudge, the eye drug. And I think most people who watch know what I'm talking about. But with YouTube, apparently this is a tricky one, so I'm not going to mention the name. The article says that the liberal media and liberals generally have gone absolutely off the deep end. They're having a complete meltdown over the fact that Joe Rogan reported this. Now, I really have no idea why anyone would be upset over this story. Here you have someone who has this horrible virus and they're cured, or they got better, they claim, as a result of taking this drug. Now, maybe they would have gotten better anyways. I'm not a doctor. But the fact is that the drug did no harm, and he did get better after taking it for 3 days. And this has been reported by the white coat doctors who are using this drug, and they're also using the H drug, which we cannot also mention for some reason, along with Z-Pack and other remedies to treat their patients who have COVID-19. Now, the white coat doctors have been vilified, they've been attacked, they've been banned, they've been, denounced. But yet these are not political people. These are not ideological doctors. They're not left, right, or center. They are simply doctors out in the field. They're all over the country who are treating patients. They have also written prescriptions for the H drug, apparently, and certain pharmaceutical chains are refusing to fill those prescriptions. Now, these are doctors. They are trained medical professionals. This is something that doctors normally, given that they go through 8 years of medical school and internship, when they are practicing physicians, they are given a lot of leeway in terms of what they can prescribe their patients, including experimental drugs. Apparently, they do it all the time. And I think this is an unprecedented situation in American history when you have pharmacies refusing to fulfill their prescriptions. Who are they? They're not doctors. And the fact that we would have major media outlets banning any discussion about treatments that are going on in this country and around the world for this dread virus. And that in fact, there are treatments that are being employed by doctors all over the world to treat COVID-19, and they're doing it successfully. To my way of thinking, they're saving lives. What say you, Dooovid, without mentioning the I or the H word?
Yeah, I mean, God forbid. I mean, my father's a family doctor, and I'm not. You said the conventional wisdom. As I mentioned, I've chosen not to be vaccinated, but I social distance,
Mhm.
and largely I'm not around anybody. So I mean, you catch COVID-19 from other people, and I'm basically hardly around other people, and I mask up and very careful about social distancing, wash my hands, and all the various things. I mentioned last week. I mean, I think God forbid uh, society is really just collapsing. There's a whole bunch of things going wrong, and we have incompetent leadership, and so they just go after the wrong things. Like the people in leadership aren't getting the results. People are seeing that society is collapsing, and so the leaders have to make it look like they're doing something. So they chase called red herrings, or uh, just pointless issues to try to you bolster up their authority, kind of like cracking down on you. God forbid, the leadership isn't accomplishing anything, and so they're going to crack down on you because you're criticizing them. And to me, that's just human nature. That's the nature of power. So it's not surprising. Like I'm not a doctor, like medical advice. I have done quite a bit of research into
Mhm.
the virus itself, but in terms of medical advice, how to deal with it, whether those treatments work. Joe Rogan's obviously an exceptional athlete, and Fear Factor fame. He probably has a exceptional immune system. So could be that he would have
Could
beat the
be.
virus
We're not
anyway.
doctors, and he took the prescription. And also, I have a TikTok comment here. Didn't Trump also legalize the right to try? Yeah, I seem to remember that. I mean, that was one of his initiatives, an executive order, that doctors have the right to use experimental drugs. They don't have to go through the arduous process. And by the way, the drugs that we're talking about, the H drug and the I drug, those are both FDA approved drugs. In the case of the H drug, it was approved in the 1970s. It has been used by millions of people all over the world quite safely. Now, no drug is perfect, of course. If you read the fine print of just about anything that you take, you see that there are side effects. But nevertheless, it is fairly conventional in terms of its dangers, and it has been used for various ailments all over the world, but yet you cannot talk about it. Yet in the last year, you had the Lancet, which is one of the world's most premier medical journals, and the journal and the New England Journal of Medicine, also a very prestigious journal, run this study which denounced the H drug and made claims that it was dangerous and ineffective. And then they had to retract that study, which was unprecedented. Never had they had that happen. They're always a very well respected and known to do very serious vetting. They would have to actually retract an entire study is actually a scandal for them, and should be, and it was, even though it wasn't
Yeah, I mean,
magnified.
neither one of us are health expert. Doesn't pay to get too much in him. I think you agree. The nature of the beast is just as more and more things go wrong, the people in power, Democrats specifically, need to explain why things aren't going the way they want them to, and therefore they're going to say because we don't have enough power, and they're going to try to gain more power. And coronavirus is going back up, and so they blame it on the unvaccinated, blame it on misinformation, blame it on all these other things, and saying in order to defeat coronavirus, what you need to do is give more power to them. And God forbid you have this situation where there's a distrust of the citizenry by the government, and people are starting to turn on each other. And maybe with the Texas abortion ban, I was mentioning the likelihood of some sort of balkanization or splitting up of America, and
Well, I'm not
just
that pessimistic, David, but I just would ask the question that I started with here, and I'm not going to comment on, vax versus non-vax. I am vaccinated fully, as is my family. I'm not anti-vax at all. But on the issue back to the H drug and the I drug, my question to liberals is, why are they all twisted out of shape over discussing this? Why are they attacking Joe Rogan for mentioning that he had been treated with the eye drug and he no longer has the disease? I just, what is the problem with that? I
Well,
mean,
it's like communism. It's the control of information. Even I've discussed this with Luke Ford and you in the past, that free speech is not necessarily a Jewish value, and just a distrust in human nature. And that, like, we know the answers. We could beat this if everyone just followed and did what we told them to. And the problem is that there's misinformation. And so if we could just control the information, everything's going to be okay. And, like, you could call me a conspiracist, but I'm skeptical. I don't like centralized authority, and I tend to disobey.
Yeah, same here. And I'm not engaging in any kind
I
of.
mean, the nature seems obvious.
I could actually understand a little bit
that what they're
maybe
doing, it's obvious the human nature and the
Dooovid, but I
psychology
actually
that
understand
they want to control the flow of information.
and some of that should be controlled. I get the fact that there might be some censorship around certain conspiracy theories pertaining to the virus and to the drug. There were some really extreme things I've seen out there that I think, yeah, that they kind of cross a line. And I'm
You don't
not
have
sure
faith
what
in
that
the
line is.
intelligence of the average person
Yeah, but
to make good
no,
decisions.
when it comes
It's just
to a
like hate
disease-
speech. The solution to hate speech is more speech. The solution to disinformation is more information.
True,
and it's
but
not
at the same
controlling the
time, when it comes to a
information.
disease, you have to be careful. But what I'm talking about here is not a conspiracy theory. This is 2 drugs that are FDA approved, that are being used all over the world, and that have been proven by most accounts to be effective. And yet it's not only banned on YouTube, but the liberals hate it, and they're like screaming at the mere mention of it. They absolutely, their hair goes on fire.
Well, it's cancel culture. It's because they don't like Rogan in the first place, because of various political reasons, and it's just an excuse to try to cancel it and ruin him. Look at this crazy man. Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he do? Like, there's been enough reason for years to cancel this crazy man. And
Maybe,
so just
but
every turn, I mean, just like you have to watch
Sure.
every step that you make, because there's someone who's just sitting there
who has an
waiting to
iPhone.
cancel you,
Yeah.
waiting for you to say the wrong thing so
I
they
get
could cancel you, and say, like, that's kind of obvious.
No, I
what's
get
going on.
that. That's a lot to do with it. I just would note that these drugs are being used by everyone, liberals, conservative, left and right. These doctors, the white coat doctors, are not liberal or conservative. They're just doctors. This is not a political organization. And, liberals and conservatives are being treated. Now, one of the doctors who spoke recently, they do these press conferences in the steps of the Supreme Court, noted that the COVID virus is like in 2 stages. It's the early stage and the late stage, and that these drugs have to be used in the early stage. The studies being done that seem to suggest that these drugs are not effective, it has to do with the fact that the drugs were given to someone at the late stage when they were very seriously ill and they may not survive. So then they could say, you see, the drug doesn't work. And it can't really be effective at that point. You have to catch the disease early. If you have the disease and you see a doctor and you get the prescription for this drug early, then it's effective, not late. So I just think we need to make that.
Just because we're talking about COVID-19, like, I was looking at the numbers and chart, and I'm more a numbers guy, and it would appear that the worst is going to be ahead of us, and we're probably going to have the largest outbreak ever. And even in Israel, it's starting to get bad like that. With they're right now, Israel has had over 10,000 cases a day, 3 days in a row. It's had the highest infection rate in the world right now, higher than
deal with that, Dooovid. It's the most vaccinated society in the world. Along with,
evidence has been clear since the beginning. Vaccine does not stop transmission. It helps prevent severe sickness and death, but it is minimally effective, and possibly with the Delta variant, hardly effective at all at stopping transmission. So it doesn't matter if everyone's vaccinated.
At least
the virus is still going to spread. And you see in other countries, I think in Canada, the mask mandates are still required. And even, Vincent Racconello, I've been watching, liberal out of Columbia, was saying that getting rid of the mask mandate was a really, really bad idea. And I'm not sure if we're going to go back into lockdown, but these numbers in the US, like we're already had over 1,000 deaths a day. It's over 1,500 a day now. And looking at the numbers, there's no reason. I mean, Dr. Fauci is giving, it's always kind of like they give you a little bit and then they tell you a few weeks later, like, oh yeah, it's going
Changes his mind. Yeah,
but now they're saying expect 100,000 more deaths by the end of the year. And God forbid, if you look at the chart and the exponential growth and the likelihood that we're going to see a worse outbreak than we saw last year coming up, schools starting and everything, is that it's not just going to be 100,000 more deaths by the end of the year. It could be more deaths than we've seen so far. And you look worldwide, worldwide, they've been hovering about 10,000 deaths a day from COVID-19 for like a year now. It hasn't gone down.
Let me this is a little maybe correction here, and someone sent this to me on TikTok, that the vaccine, they say, is 91% effective in terms
against severe sickness and death.
And also in terms of preventing the spread of the disease. Now, I have no idea.
Israel, the numbers are coming out that maybe it's 50%, even as low as 42% effective against infection and spread.
And
it's funny, the Ger Rebbe
calculation when I decided to get the vaccine, and that look, first of all, I'm old. If I was a young person, I might think about this. So, I have less to lose. I have most of my life behind me. So I felt like I made a calculation that it was worth the risk for me to get the vaccine as opposed to getting the disease without the vaccine.
Do you get a flu shot every year?
Actually, I don't, because I had a bad reaction to the flu shot last time I had it. So I was nervous about that. I actually consulted with my doctor. I had a little extra observation after getting the shot. I had no reaction particularly. But to get back, I had it because I feel like, at my age, I would rather take the risks associated with the vaccine, which are there. I'm not going to get into that, but they're there. And I think that they might be there more so for younger people. But for me,
we've discussed in the past, and I said the science out of Asia seemed to be, you don't beat the virus through vaccines, you beat it by lockdowns and social distancing. If you look what happened in New Zealand, New Zealand had just one case, and they went into lockdown.
Yeah, and that's something, I don't know. I think you beat it traditionally by herd immunity. You develop enough people have had the thing. And I think that, I hope I'm not getting in trouble with YouTube here. Again, I'm not a doctor, but I listen to doctors regularly, and I follow this carefully as a journalist, if you will. And that is that if you've had the vaccine, if you had the disease, you have natural immunity to a very high degree and for a long time. So traditionally,
no, that's not what the experts say. In Israel,
no, it is what they say.
In Israel, they're saying, the protectiveness you have from the having had it already is less than the vaccine. And also there's a significant number, in Israel, there's a significant number of people who've been reinfected for the second time. I think in Israel right now, there's, of the current 70,000 people that are, or 80,000, whatever it's up to, that are infected right now, 5,000 of those have it for the second time now.
Okay, fine. Do they have the vaccine?
Yeah, and the vaccine. I don't know how many the second time and the vacccine, but it's saying there is nothing you could do that prevents you from getting COVID-19. You could get the vaccine. The best thing is just avoiding people, because it gets spread by people. Social distancing and cleanliness and hygiene is the single best way to avoid it. The vaccine decreases your chances. Having had it before decreases your chances. But no, and I told you the science before. Coronavirus has been around for decades. It causes 20% of the common colds. There's no vaccine that has ever been able to beat the coronavirus. So, the new vaccines that supposedly are going to beat it, saying historically, they said, no, coronaviruses can't be beat by vaccines.
Fine.
I mean,
But
don't you remember
and
that
again,
when,
we-
when
let's-
don't you remember that when the virus first came
Sure.
out and it was like, oh, it's a coronavirus, and vaccines have historically
No,
not
it's
worked
never
against.
going to totally get rid, and we'll never totally get rid of it either. I mean,
Well, I'm
it's
not like measles. It's like measles, the vaccine
yeah,
is extremely effective,
sure.
but
Smallpox,
coronavirus
yeah.
historically vaccines are not. And yeah, I've looked into this, and God forbid, if you combine it, like I think the global warming charts say that
I want
starting
to
in
get into
20.
that subject next, but let me just wrap this up by saying that I don't think we're ever going to get rid of the coronavirus any more than we're going to get rid of the common cold. It is the common cold itself actually is a coronavirus. But the best thing you can do, as you say, Dooovid, besides keeping a level of social distancing, and I think customs like handshakes probably should be a thing of the past, not getting too close to people and avoiding very close quartered crowds and inside crowds, is to strengthen your immune system by doing things like, avoiding, avoiding highly, fast foods and, processed foods, and taking vitamin C, D, and zinc.
Hygienics, good health, basic. I mean, you're a history
Exactly.
expert, isn't it? So, especially like in the East Coast, that I believe yellow fever used to kill like 1 to 5% of the population every single year till about 1910 or whenever they figured out how to beat yellow fever. But was it yellow fever caused more damage than coronavirus basically every year for hundreds of years?
Sure.
Isn't that historically
Yeah,
accurate?
I think it is.
Like
And
2% of humanity died of yellow fever
yeah, there
every
were
year.
I mean, look, the bubonic plague wiped out about a third of Europe.
I'm not talking about
So-
the bubonic plague that was a 1 year plague. I'm saying that yellow fever just killed 1% of humanity every year for like 100 years.
Yeah, and also, as a historic note, I was reading into, like, I do a lot of reading of Jewish history, and I was reading about the Dreyfus
They used
trial.
to abandon towns. Like I think Boston, a few years, Washington, D.C., they abandoned the whole town because of yellow fever outbreaks like multiple times, right?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. It's a, and they used an old fashioned kind of a vaccine. But in my reading of Jewish history, I did a little reading on the Dreyfus trial. And apparently when Dreyfus was condemned to to Devil's Island as a prison, which is off the coast of French Guiana in South America, him and his wife had a very long exchange of letters. And those letters, I think, have been published. But one of the things his wife said to him was, to avoid fever, make sure you get a lot of quinine. Now, quinine is tonic water, is quinine, and it's created with a process of the rinds of oranges and grapefruits. I'm not exactly sure the recipe, and the zest, and then it was seen as a natural means to reduce fevers and to reduce exposure to viruses. And in fact, the reason why the British developed gin and tonic was because in the tropical colonies like Singapore and parts of India, and there was fevers, and they got used to drinking this, so as a way to naturally ward off the virus. Now, quinine, as I say, it's in tonic water. I'm not saying have it, although I will tell you, as a matter of record, I do drink it since I read this. It's the main ingredient in the H drug. Let's just put it that way. That's what that drug derives from, quinine. And that quinine has been proven historically to reduce fever and to reduce virus. Now, my question, to just wrap this thing up, and with the whole Joe Rogan thing with the eye drug, is that I get the fact that you want to have the vaccine, and sure, it should be made available. It should be made available all over the world. But why isn't our medical establishment also promoting, or at least studying, alternative medicines that people can have to improve their health and avoid the ill effects of the virus and improve their immune system? They're out there. This is something that,
Well, you're in Boston, the home of Harvard of the medical system, but I mean, in the US, just like crime, we don't really have crime prevention. We have a system that after a crime has been committed, the
right,
police step in and try to seek justice. And in medicine, generally, we don't have health protection or health.
We don't do, you're right.
We
We don't deal
usually,
with the
the
symptoms.
medical system steps in after something goes wrong, and
That's
it's
so
part
true.
of the structure, the finance, and Eastern medicine or osteopathic, the various
Right, it's,
forms. But I mean, the traditional Western, and I would blame more capitalism. Even I say capitalism's at
yeah.
fault, but just the structure of our system is that
Well, I
no,
would
the
specifically blame,
medical system steps in after a problem occurs, not
I
before
would
the problem
specifically
occurs.
blame the Rockefellers in the early part of the 20th century when they were with Standard Oil. They realized that petroleum products could be turned into drugs, and they wanted to corner the market on those drugs. They used their financial influence to drive out natural remedies, to drive out homeopathic remedies, very simple remedies that you can have. I mean, in favor of the approved drugs, the petroleum-based drugs that they made money off, and that they basically set up medical schools with big money, and the curricula would teach the use of these drugs and practically removed and discounted and mocked the use of any of the other medicines as being, booby misers, as being superstition.
I mean,
And so,
Maimonides had it clear, although Maimonides probably believed in the four humors and incorrect medicine, but basically it's exercise, diet, and hygiene. And you want to have good health. Like if you get sick, you there's but the trick to good health is simple. It's exercise, hygiene, and diet.
and breathing. I mean, I know this sounds corny and ridiculous, but I'm telling you, it's, people don't stop every day and breathe. You have to take a few minutes to oxygenate your entire body. Breathe through your nose, each nostril, inhale and exhale, and just get the oxygen flowing to the extremities of your toes and your fingertips. And
Why yoga is so popular. I mean, really, it should be
Yeah.
obvious, but
or just,
people,
it seems like a simple thing, but maybe because it's free, they don't talk about this. I mean, this is what Native Americans used to do. In fact, there was
the ancients all knew it. I mean, so even
Oh, yeah.
though Maimonides probably believed in the incorrect four humor explanation of a disease, that the basic ancient wisdom of hygiene, diet, and exercise is obvious, and modern medicine doesn't really focus on it. Saying you get pills.
No, they discount that.
The doctor could tell you got to lose some weight, or like a
And then they
hygiene
give you a
type
pill
thing.
that actually ends up increasing weight. And like, avoid diet sodas, by the way. They make you fat. But I mean, I forget the guy's name, but it was the early 19th century. He was like a resident of Philadelphia in early America. He became at like 30 years old. He was told that he only had like a year or so to live. He had very poor health. And so he decided he was going to go west and integrate with the Native Americans. He just was going to just give up. So he did. He went west. He went to the Ohio Valley. He fell in with an Indian tribe, native tribe. He became basically, he acculturated into Native Americans, and they treated him by giving him breathing exercises and other things. And he ended up living another 40 years, and he became very healthy and wrote a book about it at the time. I think, I wish I could remember his name. I saw this briefly. I'd taken a lot of news, and I just don't have that in front of me. But the point I'm making is that, to heal yourself by such a simple means as exercise, as you say, and breathing and getting out every day and doing a little walking, this doesn't, nobody makes money from that. The medical, they're not going to get a prescription for that. And if you don't get sick, then they're not going to sell you any kind of medicine. And the pharmaceutical complex, if you will, hospitals, pharmacies, it's kind of a version of what President Eisenhower talked about when he made reference to the military industrial complex. It's more, that industrial complex has changed to include big high medicine,
It's like nanny state versus personal responsibility.
big
That's
pharma,
personal
big tech.
responsibility, and the direction is pushing towards nanny state.
And also it's profitable. They're not going to make any money if you breathe. They're not going to make any money unless you get sick. So, again, I'm not getting into a conspiracy here. I'm looking, you said capitalism. Yes, it is monopoly capitalism. It's it's industrial, in collusion with government. It's not pure capitalism, which is private market, where you can talk about,
I mean, insurance setting the
homeopathy.
rates for medical fees and the government agreeing
That's
to
right.
pay it.
So anyway, Dooovid, speaking of which, since we're on these topics today,
I thought
want-
we have to talk about the flooding, and if you want to talk
that's
about
what
the
I want to go to,
abortion
flooding. No,
also.
I want to talk about the flooding because I know you have some knowledge on environmental issues.
I mentioned it happened
New
here in
York
Detroit.
is having
It
a
happened,
major-
like, God forbid, I said it was going to keep on happening. It was going to keep getting worse. It happened here in Michigan. And now it hit New York like it's never happened before. And in fact, God forbid, I saw when Henry came the other day, a few weeks ago, that had been the record rainfall ever recorded in the history of New York.
Yes.
And that was like 2 to 3 inches in like 4 hours. And now they had 6 inches in a few hours. And
8 people.
we
have
don't even know. I
died.
mean, this could devastate the city.
Subways have been clogged and with water. Now this morning I was
You need
woken up.
Cuomo back, God forbid. I mean, like, Cuomo was probably a hard worker and good at getting stuff done. And God forbid, it could be they're going to be begging Cuomo. I mean, they're not going to, but we'll see
I
how
don't
good
think
they
so.
could do without Cuomo.
I don't think so, but
I'm not saying
But-
he was a good guy, but
no.
saying
Tell
like,
that to the nursing homes. But anyway, Dooovid, I was woken up early this morning by a very liberal member of my family, a friend, who read me the Riot Act because I never really endorsed global warming, and that this is an example of global warming, and that global warming is causing this kind of havoc.
that's, I mean, I'm right leaning, but like, no, I think this is global warming.
I do too. I mean, but the thing is that it was explained to me a long time ago by a scientist, and this could be way off, and I'm not going to mention his name because it was a private conversation, but he's a significant leader in the global climate change movement. He was on his way to an international conference on this topic. And I asked him about it, and he explained to me, according to him, that global warming is a real thing, but it's not this impending hysterical catastrophe that Al Gore talked about, that it's not the sky is falling, it's not Henny Penny, it's not, Chicken Little, it's something that's going to happen over time, and that there actually are certain benefits to warming that as well. And that ultimately the way to deal with it is to develop technologies that process energy more effectively, and those aren't there yet. Wind
I mean,
and
we knew
solar
New
aren't
York
there.
and Baltimore, we're in New Jersey, we're going to be bad places to be. I'm saying Al Gore, when the people were warning about global warming in the 1970s, they were talking about New York City getting flooded. It's like Michigan, like, we're also having extremely high wind speeds and rain, but we could probably beat that. Like, okay, I got my sump pump, I bought a few extra things, my parents got a generator, we're cutting down trees. Detroit Edison just said they're going to put an extra $70 million into provisions, but like, everybody decades ago knew that New York City was going to get flooded, and I don't see any way that that's not going to happen.
And that's because of rising sea levels, is that right?
Well, yeah, and it's saying, and all the, I mean,
And it's explained
the
to me
science is
that
extremely simple.
because the world
That
is
each
getting
degree
warmer.
Celsius increase, the air holds about 7 degrees more moisture, and so they're just the ability for more moisture to be in the air, and it's just going to have more rain cycles. That it's not that complicated, and wind
Okay.
speeds from climatology, that you're going to have increased wind speeds and
tornadoes,
increased rainfall and raises in sea level. So New York could, is looking at a disaster. And I left New York 10 years ago, and I had a lot of friends, I had a lot of connections there, but I never went back because I think New York's not a long-term a good place to be. And I wouldn't be surprised if New York doesn't really fully recover from this.
Well, all right. So, what I've been told is that it's because of the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere, you have the storms that have always been there are more frequent, more intense, the wind is higher.
When the CO2 in the atmosphere causes the global warming,
Right.
The increased temperature as a result of the increased CO2 causes a higher temperature, which causes the polar ice caps to melt, and more water to be contained in, I mean, the ice caps melting is a separate issue, but you're just for the rain in the storms, that the higher temperatures creates more energy for higher wind, and it causes more water to be able to be contained in the air. So when it rains, there's a lot more water in the air to be able to come down or to contain that. But I mean, the CO2 is the ultimate likely cause, that all the science said the reason global warming is the increased CO2 levels, but the CO2 levels isn't causing any issues to the climate other than the increased temperature. And the increased temperature, and my dad, I mean, he's not from Michigan. He thinks Michigan is relatively going to be one of the better places in, probably long term.
Sure.
Assuming that the water doesn't get polluted or anything, Michigan will probably be at advantage from global warming.
So then, Dooovid, let's assume all of this is true. And I'm not here to either condone or condemn, to refute.
You're getting some Happy New Year's in the YouTube chat. Also, there's some people, you got 11, 12 people watching now. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Lashana Tova.
Thanks for all the Happy New Year's wishes.
Thank you. Lashana Tova. So, Dooovid, as a matter of public policy, if all of this is true, and let's for the sake of argument say it is, I don't think the answer is the Great Reset. Now, the Great Reset says you can't eat meat anymore, except in rare cases. You have to, the United States has to reduce carbon emissions. It doesn't mention China. And we have to have world socialism. So given the fact that any freedom-loving individual rejects that approach, what then can be done, as Lenin so famously said, to at least gradually reduce the carbon in the atmosphere, assuming that that's the problem? And by the way, even if it isn't the problem and the cause, I think we can all agree that air pollution is bad and that we ought to support technologies that reduce it. What do you think, Dooovid? What can be done?
Yeah, I mean, the main answers have been obvious. I mean, decreasing beef eating is one of them, because the deforestation for the fields and that in the trees are the best way of getting rid of the CO2. So excess beef eating is part of it. That, like, no, I mean, we can't have beef 3 times a day. That not saying everyone has to become vegetarian, but most of the models show you do need certainly decreased beef eating. But the main issues that have really, people have been working on it. Like, I'm a civil engineer. I've visited my local power plants. Is clean coal. You're saying the most important answer is not necessarily like solar power or wind power. It's really clean coal is probably the single biggest factor, and really people are doing a lot about it. The CAFE standards, oil emissions, less driving, possibly moving towards an
Maybe
electric
hybrid
grid.
cars.
Yeah, if you're a private person, what you could do, saying you got to watch out for trees that might fall. If you could get solar panels on your house, if you could have a generator installed, be less dependent on the grid. If you can consider getting an electric car, decreasing your excess gas consumption. The things even the Obama administration, from the stimulus package that had like insulation in your house to make your house more energy efficient, that there's a lot of low-hanging fruits that you don't necessarily need like some great government nanny state to administer. I mean, my grandparents, they energy efficient their house, different windows, better materials. Again, my parents got a generator, but look into solar panels. You're driving more energy efficient vehicles, and the likelihood that yes, I mean, I did stream on my channel here in Metro Detroit. It's big news, but that likely by 2050 that we will have pivoted away from gas vehicles to electric vehicles. How that's going to happen, whether the government's even
or at least hybrids
needed. There's a lot of waste. Like I said, from all of the senses of socialism versus capitalism, urban planning, central planning is very difficult. under capitalism. Everyone wants to develop their own property, and it's hard to create central planning. But just more efficiency. But usually what they don't talk about. I mean, the Koch brothers. You're saying the biggest factor right now is actually clean coal.
Oh, absolutely. I spoke with a man off the record again, because I have these conversations with people who don't like to give their names, but he was a coal industry lobbyist, and he said that they had developed a technology by which they could turn coal emissions into kind of paneling, like that you put in a ceiling, and that it was a very clean technology, a very good use of what would otherwise be CO2.
Which just means in the plant, like there's different like heat recapture, but different technologies in the coal plant that prevents pollution emissions. So most of the stuff that is necessary is talking about factories and stuff that's going to reduce emissions, and people in their automobiles or appliances, upgrading appliances, newer appliances, and just efficiency measures. I know there was the
efficiency, but also
the conspiracies about
doing
the smart meters on people's houses, but just things that people could do to be more efficient about energy usage.
I saw this company online a while ago. This was pointed out to me by my very liberal family member. This is years ago. I haven't looked it up recently, but it basically suggested that paving of highways and of roads, you could plant within the pavement solar cells that could gather energy and then run it in wires alongside the highway, and it would be perpetual energy that could be
That's very expensive. I mean, it's possible long term, like fantastical. Yeah. Some places might have that, but I was saying, like, we can't even fix our cheap roads, let alone make and maintain state-of-the-art futuristic technological roads.
I'm not sure it is that expensive. I mean,
one news story, like this was in the Michigan papers, not related to elections. Michigan, GM and Ford are shutting down car production due to the microchip shortage. They can't complete the automobiles because the chip shortage has reached a point that they don't have the chips to complete the automobiles. So something like silicon, one of the materials that's needed for solar panels. Like I hope to get solar panels. I hope my parents get solar panels. Maybe you'll be able to get solar panels. I think that might become a luxury. Like there might be government plans and things,
and it's fine,
but it's likely that solar panels will be somewhat. It's expensive and will be a luxury.
And also, solar and wind is only going to address a tiny fraction of the energy needs of the country, especially in this part of the country, Massachusetts, where I am, where there's a lot of clouds. It's not like direct sunlight all the time. It's not. I mean, it's fine, but it's not going to be the solution. It's
God forbid if you have to prepare yourself for the potentiality of power outages that might even last weeks, that solar panels, there's different things you as a homeowner could do to make yourself less vulnerable, but that would not be likely to be able to help society at large.
Right, that's right. And I think that, look, I've always tended to be a little bit on the green side, just as in the way I conduct my affairs, and I hope others are as well within the context of the free market. I don't believe in government regulation, but in that sense, I mean, I certainly am not into red meat, and I would drive a hybrid car, and I believe that I'm against the use of so much plastic. I don't think I need to get plastic bags every time I go to the grocery store. It's not biodegradable. It lasts forever. It's not needed.
A lot of it's tragedy of the commons that people just don't care.
Yeah.
People don't mind. It's just classic tragedy of the commons.
And these plastic bottles are not good for water because it emits toxins into the bottle. And apparently now, I just even recently read that you should not microwave food in plastic, because particularly for men, because it does something to testosterone levels. And there is actually something that's not widely known, is there is an international crisis in terms of the drop in male testosterone levels, which could threaten the future of all of us. Could threaten the future of humanity if you're not having enough sperm count. Let's be honest about what I'm talking about here. That, a lack of testosterone is not just that either. It has to do with the overall health of a man. You can get disease, it could lead to cancer, it could lead to, obesity, diabetes.
When we see
It's not healthy.
the
And
continual
apparently
decrease in
you
public
put,
trust, how do you solve the tragedy of the commons
well, because a
when
little
people
public
just can't trust
information,
each other?
a little public information. If you put like, I used to microwave the spinach and you put it in the microwave and it's in a plastic pouch, that's not good. Take it out of the plastic pouch and microwave it in a glass or stainless steel dish, which doesn't emit these toxins into the food. So, these are basic things that if we had a public education initiative, we could, you could make little adjustments, so you could learn a lot and improve your health. And, that's all I'm trying to say here. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily something that the government needs to get involved in. It's just a matter of public health. And the same thing to bring things back to square one with regard to alternative and necessary health measures to protect ourselves from the coronavirus. Anyway, Dooovid, to wrap things up, we often talk about Jewish issues, Israel issues. Recently, Israeli Prime Minister Bennett met with Biden. There's footage of Biden literally falling asleep during the meeting. He keeps his face hidden behind the mask, even though he's fully vaccinated. I think because he doesn't want to have to look at anyone. It's like a way of hiding, especially in this recently, this really, really disgraceful meeting that he had with the parents of young men who died in Afghanistan. And yet with Bennett, I mean, apparently literally there's footage of him falling asleep at the meeting. What went down and what do you see going on with Israel-America relations?
Well, I think Bennett basically got everything that he asked for, besides for the commitment on Iran. I think that, there was the issue of the visa waiver that Israel does not have a reciprocal visa waiver because Israel restricts visas of U.S. Arab citizens. So that he did push for America to give a visa waiver to Israelis, even though Israel wants to be able to maintain restrictions on Arab Palestinian American citizens. That probably won't go through. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to get past. It looked like Biden, in Israel, the hardline right wingers are criticizing Bennett for Iran, that basically Biden got Bennett to pledge that he wasn't publicly going to try to press America against any Iran deal. So, those would have been two losses for Israel. But generally, I think that Biden agreed to the $1 billion replenishment of the Iron Dome missiles and the continued military aid and all the various cooperation measures that are in place. So Bennett was basically like a complete win. The international media didn't cover it much. Israeli government, they just passed the budget. They didn't pass the budget. They proposed a budget, and they have to, I think, till November 15th to pass it. And it looks like Lieberman, who's the finance minister, did it in a certain way that if they don't pass it by November 15th, the government's going to fold. So Israel has to get together and pass a budget. So we'll see if they could do it. But I think it was basically a non-issue. Bennett came, and all of the military contracts and agreements and financial considerations were extended. The small diplomatic things like it doesn't look like a new Iran deal is really being negotiated anyways. The visa waiver programs, not Israel would have liked to get that, but they didn't. Whether the U.S. reopens up the Palestinian embassy mission in Jerusalem, which Israel is against, and Biden said they were going to do, is rather a mute issue compared to the regular flowing of billions of dollars of U.S. military aid and agreements to the military cooperation. So, that's why I think it probably wasn't a big media thing, and all the contracts and deals that they wanted to carry forward are being carried forward. And Biden probably, he probably did just fall asleep, saying like Bennett didn't sign those deals with, President Biden. And so Bennett they probably argued about Iran and exchanged pleasantries. And then when it came in front of the meeting, Biden probably did just fall asleep. And, that's the unfortunate state. Like,
Well,
we don't have the power, like I said last week, to say US power is declining. And for the president, like Blinken was like, we're back stronger than ever. And just say, unfortunately, US is in, increased world competition, and we have hard economic times and increased debt in various reasons, that we don't have that much power on the international scene as maybe we did before. And instead of saying that, they're pretending like everything's going so great, and therefore he just falls asleep. I think Israel is preparing to pivot to other powers. So I mean, Israel is trying to maintain good relations with the US and the importance of it, but the Israeli media, if you're looking at it, is kind of trying to move away from US dependency, and also could be a moving away from minding so much of what I was talking about, the group strategy difference of American Jews and Israeli Jews, that Israel is just going to have to pivot more towards what's best for Israel than a global view of collective Judaism that includes Israeli and American Jews, and that we'll each have to go our own way, so to say, that American Jews are going to have to do what's in the best interest of American Jews, and Israeli Jews are going to have to do what's in the best interest of Israeli Jews.
Well, I think Israel has always, regardless of whether they have a liberal or conservative government, they have always watched out for their national interests, because they're in a constant state of war. They have no choice, and either that or the whole ideology.
Even in rhetoric, they say, even if on reality on the ground, that's always how it's been, that the rhetoric is shifting also, that there's not so much even an attempt to make a rhetoric of Israel.
Right, there's no nod. But I mean, look, Israel obviously, like every country in the world right now, realizes that with this present regime, they cannot depend on the United States. There's a power vacuum.
Israel got everything it wanted. It got the $1 billion replenish of Iron Dome. It continued the military aid.
Also,
in that sense, but I'm saying long-term and strategic interest, Israel is reaching out to other world powers moving forward. But
I think Iran got a lot too from this billions and billions of dollars in military hardware that was lost in Afghanistan. Now there's video of it showing up in Iran. So the entire world is less stable now. Unfortunately, elections do have consequences. You have North Korea starting up their nuclear program again. You've got China, rattling a saber at Taiwan, taunting Taiwan, saying, you want to depend on the United States? Look what happened in Kabul. And that's not a joke. That's not just rhetoric.
China's going to be the big issue they didn't speak about, of whether the U.S. wants to push Israel to take stronger actions against China, or whether Israel, in Israel's own interest, will pivot more towards China and away from the U.S.
Well, I mean, even
that could be straight self-interest. That's Israel's self-interest to pivot more towards China. That Israel will probably do what it has to do, and that might include pivoting towards China.
Sure. China is the future of the world right now, and something that President Trump understood and tried to use whatever leverage we have left to continue America's sovereignty.
Like Africa, that Israel would cooperate with China.
Sure,
in
the
projects.
United States is cooperating with China.
And also the unspoken, Israel is a military supplier, military contractor, that Israel is increasing, its military deals, that like Thailand, Israel just sold a whole bunch of weapons to Thailand. Israel had been a big seller of weapons to the propped up Afghanistan regime, and it looks like that's going to increase. I mean, we talked about that in the past.
Yeah.
But it could be in Israel's self-interest that Israel does want to pivot itself as a weapons dealer, and certainly as American Jews, that's probably not the type Israel that your American Jews want to support. But in Israel's survivor self-interest,
Well, Israel's
Israel
always been
wants
in
to have
that.
such a powerful military that they're making so many more weapons than they need to handle their close immediate possible threats, that they could also gain international relations by supplying weapons to rising Eastern and African powers.
Well, they've always been in that business because they're at war and they need weapons, and thus they became very good at developing not only weapons, but national security, cybersecurity, technologies.
Drones
Yeah,
is one of
oh, yeah.
the main things that Israel is
I think
really
Israel
good at, that sells around the world. In fact,
Sure.
that Israel was even selling drones to Afghanistan and also
Okay.
fighter pilots, and that's been a possible where the U.S. has been encouraging Israel to not make certain sales, that Israel has been trying to make the sales or pushing as far as they can without America saying we're going to have to stop the military aid if you keep on supplying weapons to these powers. And the Philippines was something, Indonesia was something like that, where America was strongly discouraging Israel from making weapon sales, but they didn't put like a hard red line, and Israel basically went ahead and made the weapon sales.
Well, look, it's an area that involves a lot of stuff that we don't know about because it's clandestine.
Yeah,
But
I doubt Biden was. I was saying Bennett is a smart guy. Like, he's a military guy. He was part of the elite unit. He's a self-made millionaire. He probably spoke with the U.S. State Department about that, and Biden probably just fell asleep and doesn't even know anything about that.
I don't know whoever's running the country right now. We don't know. A bunch of
Well, I was saying that the military industrial. I mean, it's scary here in America, because you see that the big tech is teaming up with the military industrial complex. But I was saying Bennett, you had a lot of dealings with the State Department in terms of these military deals, and Biden probably doesn't even. He probably couldn't even be explained this stuff by his staff if they wanted to.
Well, I don't even know if he can explain much outside the basement of his house. Anyways, Dooovid, listen, what do you have coming up on your show?
Nothing much. The Jewish holiday season, past years, it's coincided with weekends. So, Monday night, so Tuesday and Wednesday next week will be Rosh Hashanah. And then, the 10th day of the month is Yom Kippur. And then after Yom Kippur, the next Monday and Tuesday will be Sukkah. And then the week after, the next Monday and Tuesday will be Simchas Torah. So there's a lot of Jewish holidays. I'm not sure if streaming, so that we could stream next Thursday because the Rosh Hashanah is next Tuesday and Wednesday. If anyone invites me or wants to talk much about Judaism, I should still be doing my Sunday week in review. But the next month is basically a Jewish holiday season. So blessings, everybody. Should be sealed, written into the book for another year of peace, prosperity, health, and wealth. If you're a believer that God ordains not just the fate of the Jewish people but in Israel, but in fact the whole material realm and all of humanity, things like the environment. And so my local synagogue has returned to outdoor minyan, at least for those that want it. So Rosh Hashanah, I'll be able to go, and they have a tent set up and hear the shofar and take part in the prayers. So blessings to you, Charles. Hopefully, any mistakes I've made, things, you've got Paul in the chat. But hopefully people can forgive each other and try to move towards better things for next year.
Absolutely. And same to you. And this is a time of atonement. It's a time of seeking forgiveness. And part of seeking forgiveness of sins that we may have committed against each other is to do something active to try to recompense besides just simply asking for forgiveness. Anyway, Dooovid, so I'll talk to you next Thursday, and to all of our listeners, as we say, Shana Tova Tika Tevu.